Last Call at the Zero Angle by Jason Fry with art by John Van Fleet. Tana Chalain knew trouble was coming for the TIE fighter pilots of Nashta's squadron when Huck Trompo started to sing. The problem wasn't that Trompo was singing a groundhog anthem in the bar. The Zero Angle was no stranger to pilots bellowing beloved unit anthems over the thump of its jukebox. It was that Trompo was singing the anthem while staring, challengingly, at a table a meter away, one occupied by a quartet of angry-looking vac heads. "Trompo, you better end transmission," Chalain warned. "Florin's giving you the evil eye." Sax Hasher, Nashta's squad's leader, turned his chair to regard Florin, the tough old cyborg bartender who ran the angle with a literal iron fist. Florin was washing a glass with his usual grim precision, but the red pinpoints of his cybernetic eyes were locked on Trompo. "Better do something, Sax," muttered Arder Asada, "before Sully starts singing too." Asada's prediction was right. As was truly annoyingly often, Sully Olvar shoved his chair back and rose unsteadily to his feet to join his wingmate and partner in crime in the song. Trompo grinned and raised his glass, but found Haster's hand locked on his forearm. "Throttle down, Huck," Haster warned. "It's too early to start a fur ball between groundhogs and vac-heads." "Come on, boss," Trompo complained. "Been a long day." "I know it," Haster said. "But I'm not signing you out of the brig again. Hey, Florny, couple more Iblas?" Chalain shook her head as Trombo and Olvar reluctantly planted their rears back in their chairs. The Nashtas were groundhogs, TIE fighter pilots who flew in planetary atmospheres on missions for the Imperial Army. Maneuvering a TIE through goo was more difficult than flying through emptiness of space. That was the domain of the Vacheads, who flew for the Imperial Navy. Yet it was the Vacheads who wound up on the recruiting posters and whose victories over rebels, pirates, and slavers dominated the HoloNet. No groundhog thought that was fair. But resenting it was one thing. Trying to goad Vacheads into fistfights while off duty was something else. With the threat of a brawl momentarily averted, Chalain let her gaze wander around the bar. As usual, Angle was packed with Imperial pilots, crashing glasses together, arguing loudly about tactics, or just sitting quietly. Nearly all of the pilots were human, and Chalain could judge how long they'd been at the bar by the state of their olive green uniform tunics. Some were perfectly crisp, suggesting their owners were new arrivals. Others were wrinkled and or stained, adorning pilots who should have left some time ago. And a few had been removed and discarded on their back of their chairs. A sure sign of debacle in progress. Chalain's own tunic was immaculate, but then she never drank anything stronger than water, and distilled water at that. The Angle was famous for a number of things. It had its implacable bartender, its policy of serving groundhogs and vacs alike, and its long-standing tradition that anyone above the rank of squad leader stayed out. That made it a sanctuary for the pilots of bright Jewel-over-sector flight base, which dominated the drab surface of the moon Axilla 3. Within the Angle, a pilot was free to get sloppy, angry, or maudlin without risking a black mark on his or her service record. Trompo drained his Ebla and gazed at the ceiling for a long moment. Chalain waited for his eyes to close and his head to flop backwards in his chair. If that happened, should she grab his chair or let him crash on the floor? She wasn't sure. But then Trompo leaned forward, his eyes bright above his flushed cheeks. "Those vac-heads were going to love my song," he insisted, and bringing his fist down on the table hard enough to make the glasses jump. "They absolutely were," Alvar said, backing up his wingmates as always. Chalain shook her head, deciding that if it came to it this time, she'd let Trombo risk a cracked skull. Perhaps it would knock some sense into him. Trompo was a brilliant pilot, with an instinctive grasp of tactics, but he had the impulse control of a sand panther in heat. We should talk about what happened at Portocore, Asada said quietly. The other Nashta's eyes all turned to Asada, who was gazing down at the scarred surface of the wooden table. There's nothing to talk about, Hastur said, seeking refuge in his glass of Vosh. We accomplished the mission. That will happen again. We lost people. That will happen again too. But the intel, began Asada. The mission's over, Trompa said, angrily slashing at the air for the emphasis. The gesture knocked over Asada's glass of lum, sending the other Nashas backpedaling for the table to avoid the rapidly forming lake. The mission's over and I feel like a song that all these laser-brained vackheads better enjoy. Thrusting his elbow into the air, Trombo roared out the opening line of the Groundhog's anthem. Oh, who flies so high in the sky so blue, which promptly Olvar to shout the traditional response, We do, we do. Brace for impact, Chalain muttered to Hastur as other tables of groundhogs joined in the singing. It's been a bad day, Tana, Hastur said quietly. Blowing out a few bad ions keeps them sane. Chalain scowled behind the cup she'd rescued from the flooded table. The vackheads at the next table exchanged glances and got to their feet, nodding at each other. When Trombo stopped to breathe, they were ready with the song of the beginning of their own. Who's on the attack in the space so black? Which was followed by shots from at least 4 tables of vackheads. We are, we are. Asada sighed and sipped what he'd been able to salvage of his lum. I wouldn't mind all the commotion if even one of these idiots could carry a tune. For a minute or so, disaster remained hypothetical. Trompo and Olvar circled through the angle, trying to rally their fellow groundhogs to drown out the vackheads. The vackheads redoubled their efforts, and Florin confined himself to a slow, annoyed shake of his head. But then a drink got spilled, or perhaps thrown, and words were exchanged, and soon enough glass was breaking and fists were flying. Let me know when lightning shows up, Hastur said warily. Hastur stepped back as Olvar and a wiry vackhead began grappling. A moment later, Asada dodged as Trompo hurled a burly pilot onto their table. The fallen pilot sprang up and bull-rushed Nashta, the two coming together with an impact of flesh punctuated by grunts and curses. A vackhead, who'd been on the wrong end of a punch, stumbled into Chalain, sending a ribbon of water out of her cup and up into the air. She moved slowly to one side to catch the water as it fell, and then booted the vackhead in the rear, propelling him back into the melee. Trompo tried to get behind the vackhead. He was fighting, but was too slow and took a hard left on the point of his chin. He staggered and crashed down on the corner of the table, which let out a groan of overstressed wood and tipped, depositing Trompo on the floor surrounded by glass and puddles. Then the table fell on him. Incoming! Chalain warned Hastur as a glossy black astromech adorned with jagged yellow stripes rolled out from behind the bar. A sphere on a metal stalk rose from a hatch in its dome. Florin followed a step behind the droid, tucking his rag into his apron. The Nashtas clapped their hands over their ears, as did all the pilots, who weren't too busy fighting to notice the droid's arrival. 5 seconds ought to do it, Lightning, Florin said. A shriek from Lightning's sonic emitter filled the angle. The brawling pilots crumpled to the floor, hands fumbling to protect their ears. That one started it, Florin said, pointing to Trompo, who was trying to crawl away. Lightning tootled cheerfully, and a panel opened on his front. He extended a prod and jabbed it into Trompo's side, enveloping the pilot in brilliant sparks. Trompo yelped and rolled into a fetal position, kicking feebly at his tormentor. Really, Florny? He complained. The shrieker wasn't enough, so you had to try and stun me. You were doing a capital job stunning yourself, Florin said. Now get up, all of you, get up and shake hands. The groundhogs and vackheads muttered mutinously, but Lightning rolled forward with an electric chuckle, prod crackling with energy. The pilots shook hands mullishly, then began righting fallen chairs and retrieving tumbled glasses. Most flight bases have one bar for groundhogs and another for vacheads, Florence said. You know why the angle's different? Because all your little feuds are a bunch of poodoo. Doesn't matter if you fly in the blue or the black, in goo or vacuum. We all fly suicide sleds, no shields and no defenses, except for the skill of the hand on the stick. Florence signaled for Lightning to go back behind the bar, then swept the room with his cybernetic gaze. Rack up half the flight hours I had before the crash, and you can talk as much trash as you want, he said with a cool disapproval. Or get turned into a fireball. That means you go on the wall, and we'll speak well of you. But until you do one or the other, you mind your manners. The servos in Florin's artificial legs whined as he stalked off. Trelane wasn't the only pilot who found herself staring up at the wall above the bar, at the shimmering hollows of faces and units designations. Those faces belonged to groundhogs and vacheads alike, all of them men and women who'd flown out of Exila on missions which they'd never returned. There are Southers and Plicks, Trelane said, pointing at two hollows. And a Shanto, Pastor added grimly. You mean Pool Shanto? Asked one of the vacheads, sounding surprised. I do, Hester said. We were friends. Trelane wondered if anyone besides her knew what an understatement that was. Pool was at press belt with my brother Alos, the vachead said. Alos Akron? Hester asked. The three of us were classmates together. He was your brother? Then you must be, Hiwi. The same, Hiwi Akron said, nodding. We're Banshee Squadron attached to the Imstar Solar Storm, just in from Findar. Sarcaster, we're the Nashtars. Just finished debriefing after Portocori. Pastor and Akron shook hands as the other Nashtars and Banshees eyed each other uncertainly. Since you're all best friends now, you can share a table, Florin called from behind the bar. That's not happening, Trompo said as the hulking Banshee standing beside him said, No way. Both men's faces were puffy and cut. Florin shrugged. You broke the table, so it's share or stand. The Nashes and the Banshees dragged over the one remaining table, gathered the dispersed chairs, and sat down together amid glances of mutual suspicion. Pastor and Akron ordered a round of drinks. The muscled Banshee, next to Trompo, touched his swollen cheek gingerly. They call me Bruiser, he said. You threw a good punch back there. Trompo looked surprised. Really? It didn't even make you blink. And if you hadn't slipped back there, you'd have flattened my nose. Trompo and Bruiser plunged into an animated conversation about the finer points of brawling, while Ovar waited for a chance to join in, and the other pilots looked up at the wall, lost in their private thoughts. My brother's on the wall too, Akron said, pointing. Pastor located the hollow of his old classmate and raised his glass. One by one the others did the same. Now we've got 3 more Nashtas to add, Asada muttered. Akron nodded. We lost 2 pilots at Findar ourselves. I saw Portocari on the Sitrap. It was rough then? It was, Hester said, before Estrada could speak. We were hitting rebel artillery in the hills when we got the call to regroup for a strike on an urban safe house. The brass said hitting it would prevent house-to-house fighting and civilian casualties. Akron nodded, listening. The Rebs brought down Moeller with an anti-air warhead. She's in Bacta. Barca got stitched by a Z-95 inbound to the safe house. He's dead. We splashed the skull that killed him, along with its wingmates. Then one of our bombers hit the safe house. Turned out it was full of munitions. The blast vaporized both our dupe and her escort. Riggs and Chan, Asada said. They had names too, you know. You think I don't remember that? Pastor snapped, and Asada lowered his eyes. Pastor shook his head. finger tracing the rings on the table left by generations of previous drinks. Riggs and Chan. We would have opted for a high-altitude run with burrowing warheads if we'd known. They never knew what hit them, Trompo said. That's something, at least. What are you talking about? Asada demanded. It's nothing. 3 pilots dead, and Muller may never fly again. And for what? So the intel was bad? Akron asked quickly, mindful of the two Nashtas glaring at each other. Haster shook his head, but his hand went to his drink. That's above my pay grade. You want to blame someone, Archer? Trompo growled at Asada. Start with the rebels for once. They claim they're fighting for the common people, and now thousands in that city are dead because of what they did. That's right. If the brass had learned it was a munitions depot, they'd have canceled the strike, Ulver said. The Nashas and the Banshees nodded, except for Asada. I'm not sure if I believe that anymore, he said. That's rebel talk, Archer, Trompo said. How many times have I got to tell you I don't like hearing it? And how long are you going to fly blind? Asada asked heatedly, then pointed an accusing finger at Hasser. And how long are you going to pretend this isn't happening? Shalane had had enough. If you've got something to say, Asada, say it, she said. What is it you think is happening? We've been flying Fangs out for a week, and on half of the hops, we've been given intel that's unverified, or out of date, or both, Asada said. And it's not just us. I hear it's been like this for squadrons all the way to the galactic rim. Something's happened, and the Empire's responding by pounding every target it can find. Trompo's face had turned an ominous purple. He started to object, but stopped when he saw the look on Bruiser's face. It's been the same for us, Okran said. Listen to this. 4 days ago, a whole wing from the Salonan was diverted to sweep duty, looking for a high-value target in the Gordian Reach. And I hear the Empire sending a task force to the Jovan system. Jovan system? Haster asked. There's nothing out there but grain barges. Akron shrugged. I know. The point is, something big's gone down. And it's the brass scared. I hear Weller himself just came back from Ord Mantell. Look, maybe something big is going on, Shalane said. But what does it matter? We'll never find out what it was. It matters because it's our lives, Asada said. Or, at least, it does to me. Shalane heard the doors to the angle open behind her, as they did dozens of times an hour. But then, the eyes of the pilots looking that way widened, and chairs began to scrape on the floor. She turned, and it was getting to her feet even before her brain had processed the astonishing fact that Commander Weller himself was standing in the angle. At ease, Weller said. Haven't been in here since I made wing commander. He walked over to the bar where Florn stood waiting. Curly and brandy, Weller said. The good stuff. Florn placed a glass on the bar, then set another one beside it. He filled them with deep, golden brown liquor. He and Weller raised their glasses and drank them down, returning them empty to the top of the bar at the same moment. Weller put his hand on Florn's flesh-and-blood shoulder, and the bartender did the same. Then Weller turned to the assembled pilots. I apologize for invading sacred territory, but these are not normal times, he said. There's something you will need to know, because pretty soon the whole galaxy will have heard the news. Shalane glanced at her fellow Nashtas. Haster was waiting grimly, while Trompo chewed on his lip in an anxious silence, next to a wide-eyed Oliver. Asada was leaning forward expectantly, eyes locked on Weller. The DS-1 platform, Weller said. It's been destroyed. Shalane and Akron exchanged a stunned glance. The DS-1? The so-called Death Star? Shalane had assumed that was the code name for some kind of coordinated fire control technology among fleet units, while Asada had dismissed it as a black budget item created for propaganda purposes. But there was the wing commander telling them it was real, or had been real. Destroyed, sir? Someone asked from the back of the bar. How? By the rebellion, Weller said, along with its entire complement. There was a moment of shock, and then everyone began talking at once. A bark from Weller stilled the tumult. Your current Army and Navy affiliations are resigned effective immediately, he said. The Nashtas and Banshees gaped at one another. You heard me, Weller said. All elements of the Imperial Starfleet have been placed on full alert. Return to quarters for assignment to new squadrons. Ladies and gentlemen, the Empire's enemies are on the move, and we must meet them on the battlefield. Whether that battlefield is in the sky or in space. Weller nodded at pilots, then at Florin, then turned and strode through the doors. As the pilots hurriedly gathered their gear, Jelaine found herself next to the bar, staring up at the wall of hollows. There'll be a lot more faces up there before this is over, she said to Florin. Yes, there will be, the bartender replied, beginning to wash glasses. Some of them will be ones you know. Jelaine nodded. Only one thing to do about it, Florin said. What's that? The Rebs. They have their own watering holes and their own walls, he said. All pilots do. Make sure you put 2 of theirs up for every 1 of ours. Then you can come back here with your head held high and raise a glass to the ones who didn't.